Today's video is brought to you by Vinyl Moon. Vinyl Moon is the all-in-one deluxe vinyl discovery. Every month they press awesome music on beautiful colored records and send them right to your door. Join today with discount code Vinyl Eyezz to get 10% off. Alright, now today we're talking about how not to connect your record player. Hey friends, welcome back. So we've talked a lot on this channel about how to connect your vinyl audio setups, and at this point y'all are probably tired of hearing me talk about it over and over again. So since you already know what to do, today we're going to talk about what you should avoid doing. So I'm going to share with you a few helpful tips that I've learned over the years, so that way you won't make the same mistakes that I did. But real quick before we get to those, today's song of the day is Prowler by Boren und der Club of Gore off their awesome album Sunset Mission. And if you have a suggestion for a song of the day as well, post it in the comments down below and you might see it in a future video. Alright, so number one is having two preamps in the same setup. This is something that you might run into if you're not careful when you're connecting your audio gear. As we've discussed, the vinyl audio setup consists of a turntable, a preamp, an amplifier, and speakers. So basically, you only want one of each item in the chain. Sounds simple, right? Well, here's how things can go sideways. If you already have a vintage receiver with a phono input, and then you buy a turntable that comes with a built-in preamp, you're essentially going to have two preamps in the same system. So you might be spending more money on something you don't really need. Now, how do you know if a turntable has a built-in preamp? Well, it's going to have a little switch on the back that says line/phono. So if you see that switch, it has a preamp. If you don't see the switch, then it doesn't. Pretty easy, right? But let's say you've already bought the turntable with the preamp and you also have the receiver with the preamp too. What do? Well, you could do one of two things. Option A, flip the turntable switch to line and then connect it to one of the receiver's line inputs, or option B, flip the turntable switch to phono and then connect it to the receiver's phono input. That'll work too. But what you don't want to do is flip the turntable switch to line and then connect it to the receiver's phono input, because then you'd essentially be using two preamps in the same setup, which is no bueno. Alright, now another thing you could run into is number two, that the music is too low. So that phono/line switch that we just talked about is also important for another reason. Let's say you've connected everything properly, turned everything on, and you're about to play a record, but you can barely hear it. It's really quiet. What's going on there? Well, the preamp in the turntable might not actually be turned on. So as we just covered, if you connected your turntable to the line input of the receiver, make sure the turntable switch isn't set to phono, because if it is, it's going to be way too quiet and you're not going to hear anything. So this is actually a really stupid easy fix. Just flip that sucker to line and you'll be just fine. And that rhymed. And so did that. Alright, now number three is incompatible gear. This is a very common problem that you might run into when you're first getting started with record collecting, and it's happened to me too. So overall, before you buy any audio gear, it's important to do a little research beforehand and know exactly what you're getting, so that way you can avoid stress later on. So for example, let's say you bought a receiver and active speakers. What's the problem there? Well, first off, you've got two amplifiers in the same setup, and they're also incompatible with each other, so that's not going to be a good situation. If you buy active speakers, they already have the amplifier inside, and you don't need the receiver. Or if you want to keep the receiver, then you have to replace those active speakers with passive ones which don't have an amplifier inside. And then after you do that, you'll be able to hook up those passive speakers to that receiver with 16-gauge speaker wire. So what I'm saying here is you can have either the receiver or active speakers, but not both. It's not going to work. Another example is, let's say you bought a turntable without a preamp and passive speakers without an amplifier. that would be bad too. So essentially what I'm saying is you don't want to have duplicates of the same thing, and you also don't want to leave anything out. So this is why understanding the vinyl audio setup is so important, and that's why I'm always repeating it over and over on the channel. Now, speaking of incompatible gear, or simply not buying the right gear to begin with, when I bought my very first turntable, the Audio-Technica LP120, I thought I could just hook it up, to a pair of headphones directly and not have to buy anything extra, and I can listen to the music with the headphones, but I was mistaken. After I set up the turntable, I realized that I would also have to get a headphone amplifier. So I had to wait a little bit before I could start playing my records, which was a total bummer. So don't let that happen to you, and like I said, if you do the research now, you're gonna thank yourself later on. Now, moving on to number 4, we've got the ground wire. This is something that doesn't really get mentioned a whole lot, but it's still important when it comes to sound. So if your turntable comes with a built-in preamp, then it's already grounded and you don't need to worry about this at all. But if it doesn't have a built-in preamp, then you'll need to use a separate one, and that one needs to be grounded. So if you're using the preamp inside your receiver and you've connected the turntable's RCA cables to its phono input, usually you'll also see a little metal post labeled GND, and it'll have this marking, which is the universal ground symbol. So basically, if you look at this little diagram right here, you first connect the RCA cables to the left and right channels, and then you attach the ground wire from the turntable to the metal post and tighten it down. Some turntables will have a separate ground wire, and some will have the wire included in a bundle with the RCA cables. But regardless, you need to connect it to the ground on either the receiver or a separate external preamp. If you don't ground it, you're going to hear this constant buzzing sound, which is very annoying, and I'm sure some of you have heard that sound. Now, if your receiver doesn't have that little post, you can also ground the turntable by connecting that wire to the housing of the receiver itself. This is what I did with mine, and it worked out just fine. All you have to do is unplug the receiver from the wall, loosen one of the screws on the chassis with a screwdriver, attach the wire, and then tighten it down. So if you're getting that buzzing sound and you don't have a dedicated ground post, then try that and it should solve your problem. And finally, number 5 is actually a Q&A. I wanted to ask you guys, what questions do you have for me about your vinyl audio setups, or record collecting in general? Post all of your great questions down in the comments below, and I'll answer them in an upcoming video. Also, if you love vinyl records as much as I do, feel free to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification so you won't miss out on the new videos. And most importantly of all, friends, have a fantastic day, stay safe, and keep spinning that vinyl.